What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 742. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, we missed you last week.
Yeah, it was unfortunate.
You had the zoo.
It was an anticipated snow day followed by an unanticipated snow day. The second one really broke the camel's back in terms of trying to get work done because having two kids running around making all sorts of noise, and just having to watch them. So, but we had a great snow day. I'll happily report we had two good snow days. Built some snowmen, had some hot chocolate, did all that. So, honestly, way better than hang with you in Circovitz. So.
Whoa, geez. I was going to say with the level of focus you need to do the podcast, it would be difficult.
Well, I'm just glad I didn't caught up in the great aftermath analyst crossfire. So I heard there was I heard there was some shells flying back and forth.
Oh yeah, we had a good heated discussion. It was great. I love that kind of stuff, and Circovitz was really cool about it too. So that was fun, and of course we'll have Circo back on again in the future. But for now, you're stuck with Luis, and we're going to be doing the Q&A episode for MKM. We like to do one of these per set cycle, and they are some of our absolute favorite shows to do because we open up the questions to our patrons, and you can become a patron of our show at patreon.com/limitedresources. And at any level, you get access to the feed, and that's where I'll put the thread up. And the cool part about the Q&A episodes specifically is that they're any question you want. It can be Magic related if you have Magic question, but it can be anything. And that's really fun. Luis and I have been doing the show for a long time. And so to get a chance to answer questions about real life or cooking, food, travel, whatever, our other hobbies, that type of stuff, it's really fun for us. And we're going to be diving into a bunch of great questions today from our patrons. Again, if you want to become a patron and be able to ask a question on a Patreon Q&A episode or a question of the week, you can go ahead to patreon.com/limitedresources. We're also sponsored by Ultimate Guard. Why? Because we wanted to be. No joke. We went to them and said, hey, we just think you'd be a really great fit for LR. We love your products. Luis had some experience working with them in the past, and we were able to eventually work it all out. And they are now a sponsor of the show, and we really are appreciative of that. They make the best stuff. If you need a deck box, if you need sleeves, if you need ways to protect your collection, your decks, your cards, Ultimate Guard makes the best stuff in the business. I remember when they first came out and it was like, wow, this stuff's different. They really put a lot of care and effort into the design and manufacture of these products. And that can be very difficult to do. It's one thing to come up with a cool design. It's another thing to get the supply chain in line so that it actually comes to fruition. And the thing you hold in your hand is what you had in your head when you designed it. And they are experts at combining those two things together. And the last leg of that little race is to tell you that you should check these things out. You can go to ultimateguard.com to check out their catalog of products. And if you want to buy anything, you can go to your favorite online retailer or your local game store and check out their products there. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We appreciate your sponsorship of the show. We're not going to do a Patreon question of the week or a Crack-A-Pack this week because we want to get right into as many of these questions as we can. And with that in mind, let's just kick right off here. First question comes from David, who says, would you like to see Vintage Cube on Arena? If so, would you prefer using it over MTGO?
Yes, I would like to see it on Arena. And my inclination is I would still play plenty of it on MTGO. I don't know exactly. I assume we're not talking literal the whole port because I bet some of the cards they wouldn't move over. But let's say they had a lot of the cards, it's basically Vintage Cube, because we know they have the power on because they already did that event, that Theros weird event where you could have Black Lotus in your deck or what have you. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like how, let's say they had 90% of the Vintage Cube. So they made the Arena Vintage Cube and it was functionally very, very similar. Mm-hmm. I think that would probably play all right. There are some complicated board states and games that maybe would be harder, but honestly, I bet it would work pretty well. I can just imagine tapping Tolarian Academy, just puts all the mana out. I just boom, boom, start throwing cards into play. That could be pretty fun.
Yeah, that part would be cool. How do you think you would do Storm Count?
Maybe just have a counter somewhere or something.
Yeah, tough.
My inclination is I would try it on Arena because if it worked on Arena, that would be more fun generally than Magic Online, but I would probably do plenty of cubes on Magic Online as well.
Yeah, I don't know why, but for me, Vintage Cube is synonymous with MTGO. This question, I kind of go, oh no, but I don't know why, because Arena, has advantages over MTGO as far as, how easy it is to play on and, you can play it on your phone and stuff like that. So there's some definite perks to that. One thing I think that I would be concerned about is I really do prefer to play Vintage Cube as a best of 3. And I wonder if it was ported over to Arena, if it would become offered as a best of 1, which is just, to me, best of 1 is one of those things that we learn about only by doing, meaning it like similar to things like social media and, stuff like that, things that are not actually better or necessarily better for us, but our brains like it more, right? Like it's just hard to resist the hit of like best of 1 and just jump in, go, 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 go. Even though if I ever play traditional, which I almost never do on Arena, only on Magic Online will I play those, I actually like the experience quite a bit better. But that temptation of just jumping in and firing off cues and, getting that quick hit is a little too much for my feeble brain, and so I'll do it. And I just wonder if that would happen on Vintage Cube too, because I would not want to see Vintage Cube as a best of 1. Like it's already very fast and, lean, and it just taking away your ability to adjust your deck at all would make it an even faster, like more combo-y, go, go, go type format. And it's already leaning there pretty good. Next question comes from Nathan, who says, many recent formats have suffered from their fast-paced metas. At least some amount of this can be fixed by playing best of 3. Oh, interesting. Would you consider playing more best of 3, or are the incentives just not there? Should they introduce ranked best of 3 on Arena?
Look, I understand why they've done or have made the decisions they've made with regard to where best of 3 is and where, and all that sort of thing. I prefer best of 3 play quite a bit more.
I do too.
I just think sideboarding is fun. I think it's fun to learn what they have in their deck and play around it in games 2 and 3. And I think it also makes up for, I don't know, sometimes you have a match and best of 1, someone just gets mana screwed and the match is done in 30 seconds. And it's like, oh, I really wanted to see how good my deck was against that deck, or what have you. So that being said, when I play on Arena, I play a lot of best of 1 because that's what the ranked draft is, and ranked is a powerful motivator. And it's a powerful enough motivator that I've also found when I get to Mythic, I have pretty good competition. Whereas I know it's not always the case, but I have had enough of inconsistent opponents in best of 3 because a lot of the people who really play a ton go into ranked, that, you'll have some really good matches and you'll have some matches where it's like, I don't really go on Arena to try to play. Like I want to play challenging matches, and I haven't found that to be a little less consistent in best of 3. Not saying that's always the case, and maybe if I played more best of 3, I would feel differently, but that's just how I feel right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with everything you said there. It's the incentives aren't really aligned for us to do that at the moment, but I feel like best of 1 should be the thing that you do, like what we think of as quick draft, like a bot draft, the thing you do just like when you're in line at the store or waiting for somebody or whatever, and you have your phone or maybe a tablet and you just want to jam a few games and that's it. But making it the priority, making it the thing that everybody does by making it ranked and putting the focus on it. I don't believe that a best of 3 game, it is a bite-sized package enough, I believe. Like it doesn't take an hour. Right. You're not sitting there for 2 hours straight just playing one match or something. Right. With leagues, I think it's a real sweet spot where you can do your draft. It takes 15 minutes or whatever it is. You can set it down. You can build then. You can build later. Then if you want to play one best of 3 match, they last anywhere from 6 minutes to, 40 minutes or something at the high end, whatever it is. But, I don't, at least for my life, I don't find that it's crippling or anything like that. Like, I get the arguments against things like baseball games being too long, some movies being too long. I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's 3 hours. Like you're cutting out a huge chunk of time and people's attention spans aren't built for it. But I think one match of Magic is a reasonable size. And I do find it much more satisfying to play best of 3 as well. Even if I lose, like it just feels like more things happen. There's more stories to be gained. One of the things, Luis, that I like to think about from a game design perspective is, traditionally we've always lauded Magic for its ability to foster comebacks within a game, right? Where you can be behind, you can miss a couple of land drops, but then sometimes, some percentage of the time, you come back. That's actually felt, a little less and less as we've moved on. But at any rate, that element is something that is said to be very good about Magic as a game. And I think that the best of 3 format inherently brings a lot of that to the table. Sometimes you lose game 1, right? And you're like, all right, and when you can rattle off the 2 wins in a row and get across the line, you get a real feel of accomplishment, and that's gone, for best of 1. That just isn't how it plays out ever. So whatever element is there in that space is gone with best of 1. Lorenzo says, what is the best way to get into competitive Magic, and how do you usually prepare for an event like an RC, a PT, Worlds, etc.? Have you thought about this lately, Louis? It's interesting, right? Because you were, a full-time pro for many, many years. It's kind of different now, I guess.
Yeah, it is different now. It's tough. It's tough to kind of be a full-time pro, but that was always kind of tough. I think right now it's challenging to qualify for the Pro Tour. They did make it easier. Just this week, actually, they announced they basically doubled the RC invites. So Pro Tours will get about 350, 375 instead of like the 250 range, which I think is fine. I've played plenty of Pro Tours over the course of my life because they've varied in size, here and there. That I'm okay with playing a 350 person or 375 person Pro Tour. It'll feel like the Pro Tour, but it does mean it's a little easier to qualify, which I think is good. I felt like this last year. I plenty of friends who, trying to play in these things, and the RCs, you're like one big shot plus maybe PTQs if you go to a Magic Con. So adding more slots there, I think, is good. The way to start is to go to the RC. And you can't just go straight there. You have to go to an RCQ. You win an RCQ, you can compete at a regional championships, that's the RC. And then if you do well there, well enough, like I think now with the doubling of slots, probably like a 10-4 record will get you there almost all the time. Maybe even 10-4 or 9-4-1 potentially, but I don't know about that. And then once you do that, you get to play the Pro Tour, and at that point, you've kind of hit the highest level of competition. Like I think Worlds is about the same as a Pro Tour now. It's a pretty large sized field. Mm-hmm. So if you do that, then you'll have experienced like pretty much the whole range of competition. The way to get into it, I would say, is start to play online, because that you'll get so many more reps and better practice playing online than like going to FNM once a week and maybe going to the card shop one other time a week. Like I did that a lot of years, and then when I started playing online, I got a lot better. As for preparation, it depends on kind of where you're at as a player. But in general, like for a constructed event, I would say pick one of the like established good decks that you think you'll like, play it, see if you like it. And if it's like, when you look at something like Pioneer, it's like you could play Amalia, you could play Phoenix, you could play Blue-White Control, you could play Red-Black Vamps. It's all viable decks. Whichever speaks to you the best, just get a lot of games in and practice a lot, because being really practiced with a deck is so much better than trying to pick whatever the best deck is for a particular weekend. That's something you should leave to the players who have played all the decks and know all of them and will get up to speed quickly on them. As you're starting out, I mean, I always did better in PTQs when I just had my one deck. I played the whole PTQ season basically and kind of got really good with it. And those are kind of like the baseline ways I would look. For limited, of course, it's draft a lot and then consume some content, watching streamers, listening to podcasts such as this one, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think if I were to start off today and say, okay, my goal is to be a pro Magic player, I think the two biggest things that would come to mind is one, it would be expectations management as far as like, what does it actually look like to become a pro? It's heavily, you just don't get that much money from the actual playing of Magic. There used to be more a little more consistent. And so that's gone away, to the point of that I would say, it's heavily leaning on content creation or some other being in the business of Magic. Maybe you're buying and selling cards. Maybe you work for a thing. Maybe you get sponsored. Maybe you're a content creator, streamer, YouTuber, something like that. And you're using it as a way to bolster that. I would lean, that's where my expectations would lie. As far as how much money I actually made as a Magic player by playing Magic, I would assume it's near zero. I mean, I would almost view it as like, oh, I cashed a PT or I had a deep run in an RC or something and I got a little bit of money, but like, I'm not looking at that like, okay, here's my rent for the year. How much can I make off of tournament winnings or whatever?
Let me tell you, very few people made a living from tournament prizes before, and nobody's doing it now, basically.
Right. That's the landscape.
Like, it used to be such that if you were really good and you played all the tournaments and you were the highest level, there was like, I don't know, 8 to 10 people who like realistically were making enough money from doing all that they were, that was supporting themselves. And most of those people were still doing content or still doing game design or still doing like another job. And a couple of them just played Magic and that's what they wanted to do. And that's great. There was a time period where that could happen. Now it's like really not feasible to do that. So if you're in a spot to, have this be part of your life without relying on it, that's going to be the best place to be. At least that's always been the case. And I mean, I am one of the most successful Magic players of all times in terms of tournament results. At no point was the only thing I was doing professionally playing Magic.
Right.
I never thought that was a responsible thing. So.
Exactly. And that covers multiple phases of Luis's life as well, where he didn't need very much money up until, having children and having dependents and stuff like that. So
and then you need lots.
Then you need a lot of money. So that's the first thing, is that I would manage my monetary expectations. And then the other one is I would probably focus on, especially if you happen to be in the US, Lorenzo, on the RCs. Because those are really the gateway. Like, setting the goal to be at a PT is a totally fine thing to do, but you aren't going to get there until you get good and at playing in RCs, at qualifying for, getting yourself to, and then performing at RCs. That is the gateway to get in. And again, the prize structures vary by region, by country. So this isn't true for every region, but if you do happen to be in the US, those things are huge. I mean, they're like 2/3 of a PT with money and all that other stuff. So, that to me would be where I would focus, because if I was good enough to be a pro Magic player today, I would go and put my work in at the RCQs, but I would assume that if I want to qualify, I will be able to make that happen. If you're not at that skill level yet, then, obviously you'd want to focus on the RCQs first. But if you are, then the RCs are really the inflection point right now. And the cool part is that they're not just a big qualifier. Again, here in the US, they have significant prize payouts and stuff like that too. So that's what I would do. And then, you work your way up to the PTs from there. Good luck, Lorenzo, if you decide to make a run at it. Radioactive says, I have bought Kenji LopezAlt's book, The Food Lab, on your recommendation, and I love it. Do you guys have any other cook or chef content creators or similar that you'd recommend? Thanks for the years of great content. That is, to me, the GOAT. That's the best cookbook, if you want to call it that, the best cooking book ever made. And Kenji he's my guy. He did come out with another book last year. It's called The Wok, and it isn't the same thing as the Food Lab, because the Food Lab covered so many different categories. The Wok really is specific to techniques, recipes, etc. around cooking with a wok, but I love cooking with a wok. So I highly recommend that book.
At first,
as well.
I thought you meant the walk as in like, walking down the beach.
WOK.
Oh,
yeah. And I've cooked with a wok for a long time before the book and stuff. My dad was a big proponent of cooking on a wok. I don't know. He told me why he liked to cook on it, because there's kind of different heat zones. So you can kind of cook things simultaneously and it
put it up on the edge if you want less heat.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And he showed me that when I was pretty young, and it also cooks very quickly. Like you do all the prep ahead of time, but the basic way to cook on a wok is called stir frying, and it happens at very high heat and very quickly, and it produces really, really tasty results too. So I definitely recommend that. As far as content goes, Kenji has a YouTube channel, and it's excellent. He has a thing called Kenji's Cooking Show, but it's really simple. He wears a GoPro on his head that's pointed down, so you could see his viewpoint, plus another camera or two in his own kitchen, by the way. And he will cook stuff, and it's very off the cuff, and it's much more realistic than a regular cooking show where it's, hi, I'm Kenji LopezAlt, and today we're going to make, it's like, okay, I get it. I've seen these cooking TV shows and everything is perfectly prepared in these little glass, cups and stuff. And it's all just laid out with all these great angles and you can tell it's edited. In this, that's not what it's like. He opens up his actual fridge at his actual place and says, oh crap, I'm out of onions. We can use this and here's why. And he'll grab some alternate ingredient that you can throw in. And he talks through the different relative science and knowledge and things like that you need to know about how to cook something and why he's cooking it. And highest possible recommendation. I watch basically everything that guy puts out. What about you, Luis? Any influences on your cooking style?
I mean, I like Kenji LopezAlt a lot. I when I look up recipes, I frequently look up Food Lab or whatever, to get his recipe for it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, nothing specific. When I need a recipe, I will look it up. But a lot of times I cook by feel.
Oh, a feel player. Okay.
Well, the first time I cook something, I will generally look up a recipe to know what's going on. At this point, for dishes I've cooked, 5+ times, I now know how to cook them. And it's just like anything. You got to know the rules to break them. Once I know how to cook it, I can then have more confidence that I can tamper with it.
Once you know how to cook it, then you can cook.
Yeah, then I can really start cooking.
Nathan again, another question says, for Luis, curious if all the recent cubing has inspired any thoughts about game design.
I don't know about inspired. I use my game design background when I'm working on my cube because that's the reason I don't have Time Vault or White Plume Adventure. And those are specific reasons for that. But I guess it hasn't inspired me to make a new game or anything like that.
Okay. Well, here's another question from Nathan. This is a banger. This is a great question. Why are dishes with a lot of lime juice just the best? It's so true. It's so true, right?
It's because acid pairs really well with a lot of things like fat, which are things that make food tasty. So by putting, acid on your carnitas or whatever, then you end up in a spot where you just have a really delicious dish that
I'm getting hungry already. I just ate.
You have the balance there. At least that's my understanding of it. I'm not a food scientist.
No, but see, this is what Luis is talking about when he says okay, I get the fundamentals of the recipe, and he understands that, those two types of foods go well together, and he'll, make those up as he goes. Great question, Nathan. Why are dishes with a lot of lime juice just the best? They really are. I can't think of a single dish I've ever been served that had a thing of lime that you squeeze on. Yeah, that was oh no, I could do without it. When they put it in soup, it's great. Many Mexican dishes come with it, and I love Mexican food. Man, lime. Great question. Chris says, a friend and I recently successfully crowdfunded our first board game and now want to start work on a follow-up project. Wow. You should go to marketing class, Chris. You didn't put the name of the board game in here. We're struggling to find something we're keen to take forward. Any advice on starting a new creative project? Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about creative projects is you should do what you're inspired to do.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I agree with Luis, that's how I see it too. All of the things that I've ever done creatively, including this podcast, including the Watch channel and a bunch of other stuff too, have been because I wanted to, or because I felt a need to, or that I thought it would be interesting or cool, or that I might really enjoy it or whatever. But none of them have been a venture of, you know what I mean? None of them have been well, that worked, so now I want to have something else work. So what do I do? Those things came to me when I was ready for them to appear. I didn't set out to do a creative endeavor. It's just, I'm naturally a curious person, and I'll try stuff out and whatever. And then I go, you know what? Ryan and I talking about limited to it, this could be a podcast or a thing. We could try that. Right. And when I was doing the YouTube channel for the watch restoration stuff, I I filmed myself doing it so that I would have a record of where the parts went, so I didn't, forget, or I could go back and retrace my steps. And I just thought, well, this actually looks like it would be cool. And then, your brain starts going about, I could explain how these things work. I find these really fascinating. There's probably some other people out there that would find it. And then boom, you're off to the races. But, at least for me, I find it very difficult to sit down and be like, okay, let's come up with a creative project and do it. Like, at least for me, my brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah, pretty much all the stuff I have also started to do, has been because I've been inspired to do it.
Right. So I don't know, Chris, you're in an interesting position because you're right in between a business venture and a creative project, right? Like you're basically saying we did the thing that's really hard to do. We successfully crowdfunded our first board game, by the way. That's really tough. Percentage of things that get funded is low. Percentage of first time things, it has to be really, really low. So you're definitely correct to recognize the opportunity that you have as for a follow-up project, but man, I don't know how you'd force it. Maybe one way you could do it is you said a friend and I, so maybe you and your friend could have just like go to a coffee shop brainstorming session where you're just anything that flies out. And if something kind of strikes both of you at the same time, then that might be a way to kind of coerce what could be next. The other thing, it's a little more boring, but and maybe a little more obvious, is to use whatever you just made and spin off of that. Like take one element of it that maybe you didn't get to fully explore in that board game and spin it off into its own board game, or, something that could attach to that as part two that's related. Good luck with the next one, Chris. Spencer says, greetings to one of the greatest Magic players of all time and also Luis, I guess. Yeah, that's me. I don't understand why Spencer had to put the winky emoji in here. Yeah. But between the Arena Opens, Magic Cons, and pre-releases, I end up playing a lot of Day One Sealed. Over the years, I've come across 2 deck building situations that have repeatedly stymied me, both counterintuitively related to opening good pools rather than garbage. I would love to hear a professional thought process to work through them. 1, you open a pool full of plenty of decent cards, but they're scattered across 4 or 5 colors. What criteria do you use to pick 2 colors when multiple combinations all seem equally good? And 2, Spencer says, this one is rare, but it happened to me at least once. You open a good pool, excellent rares, synergies, and clear direction of which 2 colors you should go with, except there aren't enough cards. I'm talking about using every card in those colors and the garbage colorless stuff to fill it out, and you still can't quite reach 23 cards. What do you do from here? Dilute the pool with the third color, take one good color and mix it with the lesser color, or just play 20 lands or so and hope you draw all the good stuff? Hopefully, Luis is still willing to help after my opening sentence. Are you, Luis, first? Have you forgiven Spencer for that?
No, that is totally fine. It's tough without knowing like the actual cards. In general, for sealed, I would rather play a couple bad cards to play some really good cards. If I would rather my last 3 cards be kind of bad, because the difference between a C and a D in this day and age is just not that big. Mm-hmm. Like you're talking, okay, I got to play this 5-mana clunker. I've got to play this like 3-mana 2/3 with a marginal ability, and I've got to play like a 4-mana 3/4 that has like not the best ability. And those are a little behind the cards you'd really ideally play. But in exchange, you get access to maybe like 1 really good bomb rare and 1 solid rare. Mm-hmm. That's usually going to be better than playing a deck that has a lot of playables, but doesn't have the same top end, because the top end matters more than the bottom end.
How many lands would you play? Like, I know you'd go to 18 to make that situation work. Would you go to 19 or 20 in a situation where you just could not find anything to fill in those gaps? Or would you go for a lesser secondary color?
I would just play like an off-color morph in this set. It's really hard to actually end up with only 21 playables in a 2-color combination these days. Mm-hmm. And if you had like, 3 good rares in those colors exactly, then maybe play 19 land and it's fine.
Yeah. I think, Spencer, also the play boosters are going to change this. The commons are meant, there's fewer of them in a pack, therefore they have to be more on average playable, potent usable, not narrow, etc. So you'll probably see this less often going forward. What about the first thing, Luis? The plenty of decent cards, but they're scattered across 4 or 5 colors. I know for me, tiebreakers would be things like how good is my mana for that color pair and how good is my curve for that color pair. Those would be the first 2 spots I would look at if all things being equal.
Yeah, I think so too. And you can also go 4 or 5 colors, but that's a little bit more awkward if you don't have the right fixing for that. I'd rather not push too hard on fixing there.
Brandon says Age of Empires 2 has a tournament called Hidden Cup, where the top 16 players play a single elimination tournament using hidden identities. After it's all over, the identities of the players are revealed. Do you think a hidden identity vintage cube draft would be viable? And Luis, would you purposefully pass Tolarian Academy so people wouldn't immediately suspect it was you?
I mean, it is funny that whole concept, but I also am not interested in passing Tolarian Academy to try to fool people.
I was going to say that you're not,
Academy and draft it.
You're not going to get to Luis by suggesting passing Tolarian Academy, but I don't know. Would that be interesting at all? I don't like. What would be just that I didn't know I was playing you?
I think it's a cute gimmick, but I don't think it matters that much. That's how we play Magic right now, right? You log on to Magic Online and Arena, and you effectively play an anonymous person every round.
Right. What if you did? Yeah, this is getting confused. What if you did a team draft, but you didn't know who was sitting where, or who you were playing against? Guess you'd have to know beforehand to set.
If you don't know, it's just you just draft like a normal draft. If you do know, it's a team draft. Well,
I'm saying, yeah, I guess it doesn't matter because I'm saying if it's a team draft and that the players are seated in the correct arrangement, but you don't know who they are, it doesn't really change it that much. Andrew says, hey, Luis, have you ever considered writing a book about Magic gameplay theory? How come these books don't exist like the prolific amount of poker books about poker theory books? I'd expect there to be a lot of value you could bring to new players or general Magic theory sprinkled with your great stories from pro play. You ever thought about
these books do exist. They just haven't been out for a while.
It's been a long time.
But Chapin wrote one. Menendian has written one. His are a little bit more specific. He wrote an entire book about literally Gush.
I was going to say a little more specific, yeah. And then he did it.
But honestly, the free market I think is part of why you don't see more of these. If they sold like gangbusters, more people would be lining up to write them. They're a lot of effort for. I don't know. I guess I don't myself know how they did, but I think more people would do them if they were really, really successful. And I'm not saying that's the only reason to do something, but this sort of project takes a really long time. So
writing a book is extraordinarily difficult endeavor.
I just have a lot of things I like to do, so it's hard for me to justify doing that.
Yeah, I also think that strategies, and especially with Magic, they just move forward so quickly that your book would become outdated almost before it came out. And within a few years, it would be like, you'd be embarrassed about it because you'd just be like, we don't think about things that way anymore. Or they don't design cards like that anymore, right? Imagine if you wrote, a really solid limited strategy guide 10 or 12 years ago, or 10 years ago, let's say, it wouldn't be applicable today. In fact, it would be in some cases just outright bad advice. Sometimes some of the stuff would hold up and some of it would be just outdated or wrong. I mean, that's a lot of effort to put into a book that has such a short shelf life. I'd read it though, Luis. So if you write it, you got a reader here. Alexander says, not sure if this makes a good question for the show, but how can I get a card signed by you guys? Do you have a PO box? I don't have any Magic Cons on the calendar at the moment. Thanks for everything. Yeah, I have a PO box that I use for all my business related stuff. And Alexander, I can message that to you on Patreon if you'd like. And I'm always happy to sign cards. I used to sign tons of them when we did GPs. It would be over the course of a weekend, it'd be a ton of them. And now it's weird. I rarely get to talk to people that listen to the show at all.
Well, part of it is you're behind the scenes in coverage. You're not wandering the floor quite as much.
Yeah.
Whereas GPs, you're also we were doing coverage effectively on the floor and in between rounds hanging there, and people would just come up to us.
Right.
So my experience at the Magic Cons is kind of the same as it used to be for me, but for coverage, I think that would be a little bit less.
Yeah. But yeah, if you send me I can ping you, Alex, and you can send me cards to sign, and I can try to get them to Luis too. Douglas says, I enjoyed watching the Pro Tour coverage. This year, I've also managed to squeeze in a standard RCQ as well as limited one. What I was not totally prepared for is just how hard it is to get your hands on cards for Constructed. Playable commons from last year, out of stock citywide. Online shopping takes weeks. Good rares, barely in stock online. It was a slog even for standard, which got me thinking, how do you guys switch decks at the 11th hour at a Pro Tour? How do you even find 32 Vein Rippers? I assume you can't share playsets once you're all playing in the same event. Curious about the logistics. How does that work?
So for this one, we knew kind of far in advance that we wanted these cards. So a lot of people ordered them. Mm-hmm. Like I ordered them from TCG Player even. And I got them ahead of time. The the most extreme version, the worst case scenario, it's actually happened at one Pro Tour, was when you need a lot of copies, because we're a big team, of a card that isn't something the dealers will have on hand.
Because the dealers travel to the events too, so they have to pick what they bring.
Right. When you're looking for a random uncommon, you're kind of out of luck. And the nightmare scenario is you're looking for an old uncommon or rare. And here this happened. You might remember this Pro Tour, though I actually don't think they had, I don't know if they had video coverage. I don't think you were there by then, but Pro Tour Amsterdam 2010.
No, that was right before. Yeah.
I think that was right before you were talking.
That was a banger top 8, but anyway, go on.
It was. And we decided pretty late in the testing process that we were going to play Tree Folk with Tree Folk Harbinger, which is a 1 green mana for an 0/3 Tree Folk that you search your deck to put a Tree Folk and put it on top. It sounds pretty awful. And the reason it was is because we had Doran, which is the white, green, black 0/5 that makes your creatures hit equal to their toughness. And so you'd go Tree Folk Harbinger, put Doran on top, turn 3, play another creature turn 2, turn 3 Doran attack. And
smash for 6 or 5 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was incredible. So we ended up playing a Tree Folk Harbinger deck. The problem was we needed 32 Tree Folk Harbingers. We were in Amsterdam and the PT was in like 2 days. And so we're just like, okay, what are we supposed to do about this? Like this is horrible. We almost had one of the guys, Alex Alpin from Channel Fireball, take a flight, an international overnight flight. It would have cost about $1,000 to do that, but we weren't getting these Harbingers. We ended up scouring all the card shops in Amsterdam. We ended up doing all this. And at the end of it, almost all of us had it, but like Matt Nass didn't play the deck because he didn't have them. And we were looking through the whole tournament site. Everyone eventually got them. I think one of the players on our team played with like 2. They thought the deck was still good enough that they were willing to do that.
That's tough.
And it was a tough spot, but we ended up getting there.
So normally, though, you're leaning on your relationships with the online retailers.
Yeah. So actually, I got to give a shout out to Michael from Tales of Adventure. His booth is at all the Magic Cons now, and he always has access to just a ton of stuff, and you can put in an order, and he's just on site with it. So we do a lot of that. But the other method is try to just find as many cards as you can beforehand, like cast the widest net. I remember when I travel internationally for modern tournaments, bringing these like long box, like multiple long boxes of just every card I thought was plausible. You just don't want to be, in somewhere, in Spain and being like, man, I thought I brought all my Vengevines, but we ended up doing this,
Yeah. What about the Ben Stark method?
The Ben Stark method?
Yeah, just hope somebody opens up the uncommon you need in the limited portion.
That works as if it's a current set, but it's a little less good if it's not.
Thanks for the question, Douglas. Next comes from Brian, who says, as a game designer, do you think there's actually a way to improve the mana system as other similar games have tried to do. I notice Screw and Flood a lot more unlimited than in Constructed, since in the latter, there are so many ways to mitigate it, and spells tend to be cheap. In Limited, the games where there are 2 lands in your top 15 cards not only feel bad, but they aren't very interesting for either player either.
I mean, a lot of games have tried and they've come up with other systems that are different, and that's fine. But do I think that at this point other games have solved it? No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, this feels that way to me too. Mana system, something that I think that Wizards plays with at their own peril. I mean, it has proven to be that balance that would be very difficult to hit intuitively. Like if you were to design a game from scratch today with all the things that we know, you'd, okay, I'm going to design this perfect mana system, but you wouldn't understand that you actually want it imperfect, but only this much imperfect and not that much imperfect, right? You don't want it broken or terrible, but you actually want it to not function occasionally. And Magic, has at least thus far stuck with it. And by the way, anytime Magic itself has tried to play around with that type of stuff, it usually fails. Phyrexian Mana comes to mind where, anytime you can basically turn a different resource into mana at no cost, it usually ends up being completely broken.
I mean, Magic has gone pretty hard the last, I would say, couple years at this point of having mechanics that make it so you get mana screwed a lot less. Between cycling, there's some kind of land cycling. It feels like in almost every set.
It does. And then there's
that. There's that kind of stuff. There's mechanics like the double face cards you could play as lands. There's a lot more modal cards. They do try to make it so to reduce this number. I mean, a lot of their changes have pushed that, and I don't think that they've actually gone too far. But that's the Magic designers are sensitive to the fact that people don't like having non-games and getting mana screwed. And even though I think the actual amount of those things happening is probably still greater than what people want, I think there should be more, a decent amount of mana screw. I think there's a lot of healthy reasons for that. But I think even if people are resistant to it, they still have plenty of that in the game.
Yeah. I mean, blood tokens.
Yeah, blood tokens is a great way to do it too.
Yeah, really elegant stuff that they've come up with. Daniel says, "Hey guys, thanks for all the great content on the podcast. I love listening and improving my game. When Konzertar Cure came out, the names for the enemy color wedges, Temur, Sultai, etc., replaced the names from Odyssey, which I didn't even know about these. Ana, Seta, Dega. Okay, I didn't even know about these.
Yeah, those were from Invasion, actually. But
okay, good correction there. When Streets of New Capenna came out, I wondered if the family names would replace the classic shard names, but that does not seem to have happened. Why do you think we still use the shard names to describe ally colors while the wedge names changed?
I think because the wedge names were not sticky. No one knew about Ana, Dega.
I didn't.
Raka, Necra, and
I have it in front of me.
Is the last one.
Yeah, you're right. That's right.
But very few people knew about those, so there was nothing to replace. Whereas the shards one, everyone knew. Esper, Grixis, Jund, Bant. These are all pretty well set up. So then when we had a new option, people kind of stuck onto it. There was just there was less to replace there.
Yeah, and also Magic was in a much different place by the time Shards of Alara came out. It was booming. Lewis says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, do you have any hard rules you follow when presenting information to general audiences? Luis's success at getting people into one of the most skill testing formats, Vintage Cube, and the massive success of Wristwatch Revival." He says, "Congrats, Marshall." Thank you, Lewis. Have me convinced you two could be put in a room and asked to present the phone book, and I'd end up backing the Patreon.
I think it's really important to know your audience. Just know who you're talking to, what you're trying to accomplish, what they're interested in. When I talk to this is actually, I know that Marshall's run into this too. When you're traveling, you sometimes have these short to medium conversations with people about what do you do, right? That's something that's just a normal question people ask you.
The Uber.
If it's if it's the person, what's that?
The Uber ride,
Yes. if it's someone who I think I'm going to talk to for 3 minutes, I will usually just pick, oh, I work on video games. Something like that is easier. If it's someone like, let's say someone next to me on the airplane is chatty and I feel like obliging, I'm not trying to sleep or something. Well, that might be a longer conversation. So maybe I'll talk about, oh, actually, I'm a professional Magic player. Have you heard of the game called Magic? And then I talk about that. And that's why I'm here flying to wherever it is that I'm flying, like that sort of thing. And I just tailor it to, okay, who am I talking to? What are they going to be interested in hearing about? And if you do that, you can end up in a spot where you can have like the right kind of conversation. If I only have a minute or two, I'm not going to throw out, oh yeah, I'm a Magic pro, because that leads to a bunch of other questions. So likewise, when you're talking with a group of people, when I'm talking to LR listeners, like I have a pretty good sense of, who's listening, like what kind of people are listening and what they're interested in mostly. Like they want specifics about Limited, that's a big part of what we're talking about. I don't have to explain what draft is to start with. Whereas when you give a talk to a group of people who maybe is not familiar with the thing you're about to talk about, you have to start at the basics. Like, all right, well, so I run a YouTube channel called Wristwatch Revival. And what I do there, and you just explain that you work on watches. Whereas if you were talking to an audience, let's say a watch club had gotten you to, hey, Marshall, we love your channel. Can you come? Our members would love if you came to talk to us. You'll go and start talking about movements and stuff like that, which is a word I learned when you started talking about it,
Right.
But knowing who you're talking to and what you're trying to accomplish with what your talk is basically like the biggest thing.
Yeah. And for me, I know that I used some of the skills that I had built up in my Magic, particularly commentating career, when I started the watch channel. And what it was is one of the things especially in the first couple of years of me doing commentary at the Pro Tour level, was the things that stood out to me early doing the commentary were, one, that the people that were watching didn't choose me. Right. Most of the time, if they go on Twitch, they're picking their favorite streamer to watch. And if they don't like the streamer, if they just don't click with them or whatever, then they just don't watch that one anymore. But when they came to watch the Pro Tour and I was commentating, they didn't have a choice on that. So I needed to try to meet them where they wanted to be met, because it wasn't a curated audience like the people listening to this podcast right now. They obviously don't have a problem with me and Luis in the way that we communicate, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't be listening, because there's plenty of podcasts out there. And so I needed to realize that early. So then it got me thinking, well, who is this person I'm talking to? And I realized that, especially through reading the chat and stuff, that there were two very different groups, at least two polar opposites, and then I'm sure a gradient that went into the middle. And one of them were heavily enfranchised players that knew what was going on. And they wanted me to use the lingo. They wanted me to use the slang that we all use. They wanted me to make assumptions about what they know about the game and then commentate accordingly. That's what they wanted to see. But I had a responsibility working for Wizards of the Coast, and representing them at the Pro Tour level, where I couldn't appease. And the truth is, I knew most of those people too. I knew many of them, and they were friends and stuff like that, or acquaintances in the Magic community. And I really wanted to impress them and to show them that I knew stuff and whatever. But I also realized at the other end of the spectrum were newer players. And when you first show up and you're on Twitch or wherever, and it auto suggests this, and you go, what is this crap? And you click on it and you hear me talking, if I'm not making at least some effort to keep that door open for you, Magic is a very steep hill in the beginning. There's a lot of rules to learn. There's a lot of history, culture stuff with the game. There's also a lot of lingo and dialogue and stuff that we use that doesn't make any sense outside of it. And that's even besides just the card names being weird and hard to remember and all that stuff too. So I also was trying to walk this line in the middle where I was giving credence to the fact that this is a complicated but really deep and interesting game, and I want to show you some of that, but also not shutting the door on somebody who just gets completely overwhelmed within 5 seconds and goes, okay, I'm not going to be along for this ride. And when it comes to the watch stuff, it's the same thing. I know I'm talking to a big audience. I know that they don't know the things that I know about a watch, and so I don't assume that they know what any of the parts mean. Now, I don't want to talk down to them. They've been watching my videos for a while now, so they do know quite a bit, but I really always try to walk that fine line where I give you some nuggets, something to hang on to about why this is deep, interesting, and really cool, but also explain some of the stuff that is less obvious, or, that might make it difficult for you to hang around with me, whether I'm in the booth or doing the thing. And by the way, Luis, whenever you're ready, we'll start our Patreon where we read the phone book.
Yeah, we'll get right on it.
A, where do we get a phone book? And B, do we have to explain what a phone book is to some of our younger
yes,
listeners?
to most of our audience.
Yeah. Russ Valoni says, what are your thoughts on the intersection of generative AI and magic, especially the aspects of art and lore? How about gaming in general?
I don't know. It's complicated. Like, I get why people are against like AI creating things. I'm I'm not that against it really. Like, I think there's a lot of things to unpack and solve. Like, I think it's a completely valid argument that the AI is trading off other people's art, is kind of like taking advantage of that art, their work to build its own thing, and you have to make sure that you're kind of compensating or adjusting for that. But I view AI as a tool, and art is not the same as digging a ditch. I wouldn't say that, but some art, like, I don't know, when you're creating marketing materials for McDonald's, like, are the people creating those like feeling like this is important art that needs to exist? It's not the same as a drawing that goes in a museum or a mural. It's just not. Mm-hmm. And if we can have a machine make that so those people can then spend their time doing something more useful or what they really want to do, you think this is probably not the thing they would do if they didn't have to, mm-hmm. then I think that's a good thing. It's just same reason we don't talk about backhoes putting ditch diggers out of business. Like, yeah, a backhoe can do the work of 30 people. It's great. We should have those 30 people do other things instead. There's a lot to solve. Like I said, it's complicated. We're probably not going to even really be able to scratch the surface here, because I also firmly believe that like we should work towards a world with universal basic income where all this surplus value generated by the machines we make should just free more and more people to spend their time in doing what they want to do and mm-hmm. move away from the thought that every single person has to work in order to justify their existence, because that's just not true. But at the end of it, do I think AI art is a good or bad thing? I just think we haven't really solved all the things that need to be solved.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a different viewpoint than you, not a lot different, but like somewhat different in that I do think that if people aren't motivated to do something, then there's a good chunk of people who won't. And I think that's actually bad for them. Like psychologically or whatever, like people that don't have a purpose or something to push them. You'd think, oh, well, they'll just learn how to paint and dance classes and spend time with their kids and stuff like that. But a lot of people kind of fall off, when they don't have like a push or a motivating factor. That concerns me, from the big picture. And the other thing that I would say is that this is happening, this is coming, this is starting to happen already. And, we can speak about it theoretically, but like I have already seen illustration work done via text input to an AI that is awesome. Like really excellent by people who aren't even trained illustrators. I would consider them artistic or creative people, but not somebody who's been in this industry making these type of images for years and really understands everything about it. We're talking about like relative amateur creating stuff that's at least on par with the stuff that you see on Magic cards quality wise. And so, we are not that far off from this happening across multiple vectors. And I look at this stuff coming together, and the way I see it, because, there's also Sora, which makes videos. It's really far along for what you would expect, but it isn't producing like finished products just yet. The images and then of course text, written thing in different languages have we've already all seen really compelling examples of that already. And, to me, the question is Wizards of the Coast, they're owned by Hasbro, they're publicly held. If they can take what would normally be the art file and require a couple hundred artists that they have to contract, track down, pay good money, blah, blah, blah. If they can have four people that work in the building who have some training, maybe even really well trained, who knows, but really they're vision type people where they can like type in stuff and refine an image down, and it costs them 1/50th or whatever. Like, I think they're just going to do it, right? Like they kind of have to.
Yeah.
So that's just going to happen. So, we all have to kind of get right with that. And I've thought about it for my stuff and stuff that you and I do, Luis. If there was an AI that could make it, and my prediction as of now, it's really early, so whatever, but my prediction is that there, at least in the midterm, there will be two buckets of content or art or anything like that. There will be AI created and there will be human created. And I think that the human created will carry a premium with it, and the AI created will be good for mass produced stuff that just whatever. The example that I bring up with is like, if I could tell an AI to make a movie, right? Two types of movies that come to mind that are very repetition or formulaic, right, are romantic comedies and action films, right? These are two types of movies that, like, right now, Netflix and those companies pump out these rom-coms. They're just with like lower budget, not super famous people, just like, and they just spit them out, just hundreds, there's new ones all the time, because the people that watch them, they're not looking to be like blown away by some, cinematic masterpiece. They want something on that kind of makes them feel a certain way, and it's fine. And, for a long time, these action movies, these kind of B-grade action movies, these ones that they would film and then put directly to a DVD or to streaming services later on, it's the same thing. It's kind of tier 2 across the board, but it has the hero and, there's guns and whatever. And there's a big enough audience to make those profitable for people that, again, aren't looking for some big plot twist. They just want to see somebody go shoot people or be the hero or whatever it is, and I could see AI pumping out those by the millions, when it becomes appropriate. When it becomes accessible to it. But the interesting thing to me is, I know for me, and I would assume that most people, that are around now where AI wasn't a thing like when they were born, that if you told me that this was made by a human, I would feel differently about it. And I might even pay more money for it. Similar to, I can go down to Target and pick up a pair of shoes, right? And they're just normal shoes, and they're like the cheapest, most mass produced that we can get, right? Or I can go down to like an artisan who handcrafts shoes from Italy or whatever, right? And I'm willing to pay more for that if I think that it's worth it to me. And I think we're going to see a similar delineation when it comes to content and art and stuff like that too, where, for just pumping it out to the masses, it's going to be AI. But if you want something really special, it's going to have to be made by a human. You're going to have to pay more for it.
Yeah. Also, I think it's probably foolish to look at like, well, the AI is crap right now, so therefore it'll always be crap. It's like, no, it's going to keep getting better, So
definitely.
This is coming, and there's a lot of things I think we need to figure out. But yeah, I basically think let's not replace the really cool stuff and the stuff that that we like to see created by humans. Like it's kind of like if they could have robots make all fast food, like that I think would be good for humanity. Like we've determined that we want people making this fast food. Whether fast food should exist is another question. But
if it's going to exist, yeah. Uh-huh.
Isn't it better to have robots making all the food at McDonald's and then free up more human capital? Of course, the problem right now is all the profit then flows back into McDonald's and the creators of the robots, and all those other people are now left without jobs. But I don't think people doing jobs that we could have done by robots is actually what our end goal of humanity should be.
Right. Totally. And, just to put a cap on this discussion, to me, there are two places that we exist. There's where we're at now, and then there's after this stuff gets good enough to do the things that we're talking about. The in-between time is going to be messy. It really is. Because like you said, they made a backhoe, and it can do the work of 30 people. But you and I don't know anybody who digs ditches for a living, because that backhoe basically displaced that, as a profession. But when a backhoe came out, you and I probably would have known 10 or 15 people in our life, circles that did that for a living. And then this thing showed up and now they don't have a job and they have to do something else. Now, those people today might be game designers or programmers or, doing something that's, curing cancer or whatever, right? And that's kind of the promise of this type of stuff. But it can get messy in the intermediate. And I certainly think about this stuff all the time. I talk to my friends about it too. So great question, Russ. Luis, one other thing with this, isn't it interesting how there was always this talk about whether a computer could learn to play Magic, and it was like, no. And now it just seems inevitable, right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that a computer couldn't learn how to play Magic because it just wasn't worth the resources. Like they have computers who can play poker, Go, and chess. And Magic's different from those in various ways and complicated in various ways. But that doesn't mean that that they didn't figure out ways to have that work. It just was never worth it. Now, if the cost goes down, it might be worth it for someone,
Yeah. Next question comes from Wood, who says, I've been focusing on leveling up my drafting by keeping my game plan in mind and allowing that to influence my picks, and I'm finding it harder to practice that in theory. There are a couple of challenging aspects that I'm struggling with. One, if you've already picked some cards that you put into a more mid-range strategy and you see a few picks that might pull you in a more aggressive or controlling direction, how do you know when to switch? Do you think about switching game plans like that, like you do switching colors, or is it the wrong way to think about it? And two, when evaluating cards, there are some that clearly fit into one strategy or another. Do you have any tips on evaluating a card based on fitting into a particular strategy? Wood says, sorry for the long, convoluted question, but you've only got yourselves to blame because I wouldn't be thinking about these things if not for the podcast. It's a weird way to say thanks for helping me get better, but thanks. Thanks, Wood. I appreciate it. Interesting, Luis, the thing that comes to my mind is, at what point are you choosing this strategy, Wood? Because you wouldn't want to do it before you sit down. And if you're still in the draft portion, unless you're at pack 3, I don't know that you shouldn't lock it in too early here. You're saying, if I've already picked up some cards that put me in a more mid-range strategy, if I've only got some cards, I might be thinking that I'm heading more for a mid-range strategy, but I have not cemented that yet.
Yeah, you can adjust a deck very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Especially mid-range cards tend to be able to go into either because there's so few decks in Limited that are fully polarized to aggression or to control. So I would keep that in mind. You said, is switching game plans like switching colors? It is, except for it's less committal. Like you get to do it. There's kind of a flow, right? That you're like, all right, well, this, if you watch Luis's videos or Paul Cheon's videos or mine when I used to do them, you won't actually hear them say, well, my plan right now is to be mid-range. They'll say, this deck seems like it's more of a mid-range deck. But that's because the deck itself seems that way, but that's just because of the cards that you happen to have. If we fast forward 5 picks, you might hear one of them say, this deck feels actually like it's more towards the aggressive end, and I think I might be leaning towards that now, right? And that might even switch back to mid-range by the end of the draft or something like that. So I would try to be, water over rocks about that portion, Wood. You kind of just want to flow with it. If something comes in your way, you just kind of work your way around and keep on flowing. And don't lock that in too early. Like I said, usually by pack 3, I'm pretty locked in, but if it's not late pack 2, you don't really know where it's at. And many times you don't get to choose that. The table will choose that for you. It is less committal than changing colors. So you should do it more often.
Yeah, I think that the language here is pretty illuminating, where I think I'm drafting mid-range, or I'm drafting a mid-range deck. My plan is to do this. And I think for most drafts, it's not quite that set in stone, and you shouldn't really be deciding very early, because the difference between a mid-range deck, an aggressive deck, and a control deck, often it's a matter of degrees, especially mid-range versus the other two. I bet if you took an aggro deck and you took out 4 of the cheaper cards, put in 2 medium cards, 2 expensive cards, you just have a mid-range deck and limit.
Right, exactly.
They're that close together. What that also implies is you can switch pretty late. I've had decks that I thought were going to be like a blue-red controlling deck. I've got some good removal. I've got, these card draw or long game engines. But then in pack 3, I got 3 really good 2-drops. And all of a sudden it's like, why don't I just take out one of the expensive cards, leave like some of that stuff in still, put in these 2 drops, take a couple other cheap cards. All of a sudden, I'm a blue-red aggro deck that also maybe sometimes can play a good card in the late game. And if the incentives are there, you should switch. Like that is basically what it comes down to.
Right. So delay that choice and also put a little less weight on exactly where you're at, Wood, and see how that goes and get back to us on it. Next question comes from John, who says, hello, Marshall and Luis. Thanks for being the ESPN of my life. Are either of you experiencing trope fatigue? I feel like more and more of these sets are conceptually top down. How do you think Wizards design needs to balance world flavor and maybe some originality?
I don't have an issue here. So
you like the vibe?
I've been liking the vibes. Like Lost Caverns is a cool setting. Wilds of Eldraine is a cool setting. We were just kind of apropos of nothing talking about the names for the candies like Minstrosity and Candy Grapple because it just came up yesterday and we were talking about it because it's just such a cool thing they did.
And we loved it in the Sunset too.
I like mechanics that align with flavor. I think that's really good.
Yeah, I think, John, this is actually the goal. Like, it's sort of like, I think if somebody from Wizards read this, they wouldn't say, oh yeah, we need to balance that out. They'd be like, no, this is what we're going for. Like, they really want those things to be heavily aligned. And I agree with Luis. That hadn't even occurred to me to think that they would want to change it. Next is from Ron, who says, Luis mentioned Supreme Draft recently. What are some other oddball limited experiences you've enjoyed beyond the usual draft sealed cube?
I think that Pai Gao can be pretty fun. Yeah. That's like when you open a pack and you make sets of 3.
That's what I was going to say too.
And it can be pretty sweet. It's actually funny that the new boosters, you can only do 4 sets instead of 5, but because there's fewer cards. But I think that's okay.
Yeah, I like that too. And especially, we had a discussion once from like the greatest question we've ever gotten for one of these shows about fun. And, playing those Pai Gao,
I did love that question.
The question was great. Playing those Pai Gao Magic, that is fun. Like you're laughing, you'll talk crap to your friend. Like it is really like goofy, having, big smile on your face type fun. Next question comes from Alexander. Ooh, Matzkeit, maybe German. You talked a little bit with Sirkovitz about this, but I would really like to know how the new proportion of commons to uncommons in play boosters changed your draft picks. Aren't uncommons relatively more rare now that there's more of them? On the other hand, you sometimes get 2 of the same common per pack. What's your view on this? Thanks for the great show as always. Aha. Greetings from Berlin. Gotcha, Alex. Well, we are actually going to do a deeper dive on this, probably with Sirkovitz next time he comes on. He did go into it pretty deep on that.
So he is going to come on again after your shameful display of a temper tantrum.
Oh my God. Yeah. I apologize. He's ready to come back, or maybe he did. You never know. But yeah, it does change things pretty significantly. Yes, the switching to more uncommons, but the same number of slots does mean you'll see that each uncommon less often than you would have before. So you are correct about that. How does it change your draft picks? I don't think it does. It changes how we conceptually get presented cards and how decks may turn out, but I don't believe that actually means that like when there's a pick in front of you that you say, oh, well, there's more uncommons per sheet or per set now, so I need to take this uncommon. Like it still just comes down to power level. What does your deck need? Curve, color considerations, all of that type of stuff. So I don't think it'll actually change that part of it, but it does fundamentally change a lot of things about draft ultimately. So it's a good question, Alex, and danke. Next is James, who says, I find that I can draft almost any archetype, but aggro never seems to pan out for me. The decks I build, I think, are similar to the aggro decks that beat me. So my thought is my piloting of the decks is incorrect. Any advice on how to not run out of gas and know when to make bad trades in aggro? That's tough. Because those are good. Those are the things that people struggle with for sure.
Yeah, I think in general, when you're playing an aggressive deck, you favor trading because you as long as it gets you damage through. The times when you don't want to trade often are when you have like on the job or other like, go wide stuff like that makes me more hesitant to trade. If you have removal, you should use it so you can just get more damage through. But other than that, like if you're running out of gas a lot in aggro, it means you're not building like assertive enough decks that can actually get damage through. Because yes, aggro does run out of gas, but the goal is to kill them before that matters. Like a lot of games, aggro finishes with no cards in hand and the opponent has 2 or 3 cards they haven't gotten a chance to deploy.
Yep.
If they're frequently getting to the point where they're just deploying all the cards in hand, that means you're either not building effective enough aggro decks or you're not doing a good enough job getting damage through. Because that is the weakness of aggro. But if you have a good aggro deck, that is just not going to come up, as often.
Yeah, the analogy that comes to my mind, we'll see if it flies here, is I used to go to the drag races with my dad. And when you go to they call the top fuel division, so these are the fastest ones, the ones that travel around the country, it's a 1/4-mile race and they'll race the car once, then drag it back to the garage and they will completely tear down and rebuild the engine between every run. Like they don't even do 2 1/4-mile races on the same engine. And part of the reason that they do that is they push those engines to the absolute limit, right? And one way you could conceive of this is like the perfect build, right? Is the engine lasts literally just that 1/4 mile and then basically explodes as it goes over the finish line where you've pushed it right to its very edge. And, that's kind of the thing that you want from a limited deck where you kind of use your last card out of your hand to kill them. And it's like this perfect finish, right? Never really happens like that in racing or in Magic, but that's kind of a thing that you're trying to do. One thing that it's hard for us to say from here, James, but you try being extra vigilant and disciplined about what you put into your deck. I think that people that are like, I can draft everything, I draft control decks, they'll sometimes throw in 1 or 2 cards that are really not, these cab style cards that we like to talk about on the podcast, these ones that actually aid you in getting damage through. They may be a card advantage card or, something that gets you some other type of, mana advantage or something else that you would view as being advantageous in the deck, or maybe it's just viewed as being a strong card in the set. So you're like, well, it's in my colors and it's a good card, so I'll play it. Even 1 or 2 cards like that can knock it off. Because if you're doing this engine analogy, like I said, and one of your cards doesn't do anything, it isn't a combat trick, it doesn't kill their thing, it doesn't get any damage through, it's not a creature, then that could be the one that means that you don't get over the finish line. And that's a difference between I have 4 creatures to your 2, and I can just comfortably attack with everything, use my combat trick, get you dead, or get you to the point where you're effectively dead the next turn, kind of no matter what you draw, or you need something really special to get you out of this mess, versus go. And now your opponent gets all their mana, another draw step, and they're at 7 life still. And that 3rd creature that they play locks you out of ever getting that profitable attack in again. You don't have margin in aggro decks that are truly aggressive, right? If you're really building them to get them dead soon, you just can't throw away a spell slot on something that doesn't accomplish that goal. So if you are building them correctly, then yes, everything that we talked about, Luis mentioned and that you asked about comes in, but double check yourself. It's easy to be a little loose, especially when a card is considered very strong in a format, but doesn't actually go very well in aggro. Next question comes from Chris, who says, critical question for Luis. Have you started teaching your kiddos to play Magic? I started my son early, maybe too early, as now he's a teenager and he's beating me way too often. And then 2, for both, if you can add a theoretical Ravnican Lotus artifact to the cube, would you? Here's the details. CMC 0, tap, sack, add 2 mana of any 2 different colors. And then the 3rd question for both, any good stories about eating something way too spicy? Thanks for all the amazing content. So we'll start with the first one. Have you started teaching your children to play Magic, Luis?
No, my oldest, she's 7 and she definitely could learn, but she hasn't really wanted to. She plays plenty of games and I haven't wanted to push it. Like I feel like, if she wants to, she'll learn it. I've given her the opportunity to, but we haven't gotten there. And then my youngest is 2.5 and he, very far away from that being a thing we're doing.
He might eat the cards. Would you put a Ravnik and Lotus card in the cube that was a Black Lotus that sacked for 2 mana of 2 different colors?
I mean, if it was a card that existed, then yes. If they printed it in some sort of set, I'm not putting fake cards in the cube. But if that existed, if they somehow printed it, then yeah, sure.
And then any good stories about eating something way too spicy? The one that comes to mind for me and you and Paul is when we were in wherever Hattie B's was, I guess, the Nashville probably. Nashville. Yeah. And it was crazy. We went to play basketball and Luis sprained his ankle. And then in an absolute like hero friend moment, walked to the fried chicken place while Paul and I finished playing basketball and then met us back at the hotel with fried chicken from Hattie B's, which is awesome, by the way. And we ate it all together. But so that was, I mean, Golden Star, whatever, Medal of Honor I can give Luis for that. But then he also you got 1 chicken strip of whatever I think they call it clucking crazy or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. And it's like, hot. And you and Paul, I didn't actually try any of it, but you and Paul did.
Yeah, no, that was a lot.
It was really, it was quite, I mean, you guys handled it. You guys can, like, I like spicy food, but you guys are on a different level than where I'm at. And you guys actually handled that pretty dang well. Do you have, like, is there one single thing that's the spiciest thing you've ever eaten? Like, did you ever have a bad experience where you're like, oh God, I shouldn't have done this?
I don't think I have one thing that's like the spiciest thing I've ever eaten, but I'm trying to think. I've definitely gotten things that were like, I regret like how spicy they were, but I don't know if it's like, yeah, to the point where I'm like, all right, well, this was too much for me.
I mean, well, like, just to give a little insight into Luis's worldview, like not that long ago, he sent Paul and I a message. It's one of the funniest things Luis has ever said to me. And Luis says, he's one of the funniest people I know. So this is like an absolute Hall of Famer, but really it's because it shows how he sees the world, which is that he had a stomach ache. Stomach wasn't feeling good from whatever he'd had for lunch. And he said, I'm going to fight fire with fire. So he got spicy Indian food to try to tame his stomach ache. So there you go. If you ever want to know what Luis logic really looks like behind the scenes, that's it right there.
All I'm saying is it worked. I do routinely get like, I literally got Indian food yesterday. I get like the max spicy Indian hot or whatever.
Oh, do you? Okay. I always go for 4.
You know what's weird is I don't know why, but my spice tolerance actually has gone up this last year. So like I'm even eating spicy stuff than I used to, which is I don't really get it, but I still like spicy food. I eat spicy food all the time, probably every day. So
yeah, you're a big fan.
My biggest regret with spicy food is the times where I didn't get like the higher heat levels. You can't go back and do it. It's just done.
Wow. So
you're already down. You're down BT. It's like you're down Scoville units throughout the course of your life,
and you can never get them back. Yeah. But you're not at the point right where you're ordering those like little bottles of hot sauce with the skull and crossbones that say like.
I have some bottles that have similar labels, but
they're good. Like you use them to eat.
I'm not looking to get like, my tongue and my throat blasted for no reason with heat, but I do like spicy food.
Okay. Cause I know some people do that as like some thrill seeking thing or something, it gets a little weird. Jeremy says, hey guys, I hope all is well. Marshall, it was so good to hear such a great update on your mom in the last Q&A. Thank you, Jeremy. And he says, Luis, that Doomsday deck you posted the other day was amazing. Everyone needs to go and watch that one, particularly game 1 of match 2. This is, of course, on Luis's YouTube channel. Congratulations to Seth and the rest of your team on the great run in Chicago. It's great to see a new deck perform so well. Also, congrats on going undefeated in draft. Wow, this is just a lot of like positivity coming from Jeremy. I like this. Yeah. I really enjoyed drafting the new play boosters, particularly the list cards. What have been some of your guys' favorite list cards in the format? And one last note, I know once in a while you like to offer up a book recommendation. So here's one for you. The Last Kingdom series by Bernard Cornwell is super enjoyable. It's about the Danish invasions of England during the late 800s and early 900s. There's also a Netflix series based on the books, which is phenomenal as well. Thank you both And Jeff, producer Jeff, gets a shout out here as well for all your hard work. Thank you, Jeremy. That's really nice just to hear all those nice things. It's weird. The list cards didn't really I felt a little bit disheveled with them. It feels like there's way more of them. And then also there was the paper versus arena thing that confused me as well. The ones that have the smaller list that just is static, I've been able to go, oh, here's cards that I really want. But it's been funny because wasn't hard evidence the best blue common in the last thing? And, it's that was off of the list or something. So there's been a bunch of weird stuff, but no, for me, nothing really jumped out.
Yeah. I know what the list cards are because I practiced for the format, but I honestly, it's at this point, I don't know what the list is. And, and I'm afraid to ask
totally. I don't want to be that guy. There was cool cards. Is it called High Alert? Whatever it was, the one that does toughness,
sure.
Stuff like that's cool. I'm into it, but it just doesn't feel like it's consistent enough to show up and make it oh, I love it when I open this or something like that. Brett says, what are your ideas to improve the arena ranking system? Would it ever make sense to just do away with the step system and start everyone in Mythic or whatever? And then this idea comes on the heels of a somewhat recent change where they seem to just throw everyone entering Mythic into the middle of the ranks, regardless of how well or poor they did on their way there. My impression of the rank, we talked about the best of 3 stuff earlier, which I'd like to see get more of a spotlight, but the ranking system itself seems quite well designed to me. It rewards a lot of play and you can't be terrible. And I like that because I think that for most players who are, decent at Magic, but not great or whatever, being able to slowly level up but not have to fall back and have that huge backslide is really good. And then if you're really good, like Paul's currently making a run for number 1 Mythic on his YouTube channel, and he was number 3 yesterday or whatever, you're playing against good players basically all the time when you're at that level. And that seems to kind of be serving both audiences. Yeah,
I like ranked play the way they have it, as long as you're not giving prizes for ranking up too much.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that you run into problems when it's we're going to give Mythic Invitational invites to the top 8 ranked people at the end of the month because that leads to kind of unhealthy play patterns. But I do think that overall ranked play systems where, like you mentioned, you play and if you win, then, if you play a lot and win a lot, you'll rank up pretty fast. If you play a lot and don't win a lot, you'll rank up somewhat slowly. And overall, your rank will basically continue to climb as long as you play. But the more you win, the faster you'll rank up is I think an overall system that works pretty well for the range of people who play these games.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Luke has 2 questions. One, let's say you're getting together with your buddies this weekend for a draft. You have access to every print set from the last 6 years, including mastered, remastered, etc. What format or combinations do you play?
I'd play Triple March of the Machines draft. I think that's the best set in the last many years.
Yeah, I like
that for my perspective.
I like that one a lot. I would get Strixhaven in there, and I would get Kaldheim in there too, if we were, if it was going to be a weekend. And then also from Luke, what excites you most about Magic's future?
More cards getting printed for Cube.
Yeah, this is how Commander players feel, by the way. Right? Where it's new set comes out. What could I put into my Commander deck? And, we feel that way about Cube too. Benjamin says, longtime listener, first time questioner. I've been listening since M12 set review. Holy smokes, Benjamin. Thank you for listening that long. And I'm glad you asked a question here. How do you think about crushing it in a format you've never played before? I'm decent at drafts after listening to set reviews and getting a few reps, but I find myself being uncertain or pretty terrible at things like flashback, new kinds of cube drafts that I just jump in. Well, that makes you pretty normal, Benjamin. Most people find it overwhelming which is, by the way, why so many people listen to the set reviews, because it gives them some amount of footing before they have to jump into the deep end of the pool when it comes to doing a pre-release or their first draft or whatever. So don't feel bad about that. It is extremely difficult to jump into formats like that, especially if you're unfamiliar with the cards. You have to do a lot of reading in a very short period of time and just kind of make guesses. It's a very tall order to do so. In fact, I certainly don't enjoy it. I almost never do flashback drafts unless it's a specific format that I really, really love and that I really, really know, because I don't even like spending 1 or 2 drafts just to reacquaint myself. Like, I find that annoying. The thing that I love about draft is really knowing all the cards, all the things, and trying to maximize in that way. That's where I have the most fun. That's where I feel like it's the most deep. It's also why I don't really like board games that much, is because I don't like sitting there and having to learn the rules for 3 hours, finally feeling like I'm going to get it, and then have everybody go, okay, I'm going home now. And then I don't play that game again. I like to go really, really deep on the hobbies and games that I like. And that's why I almost never do it. Really only poker and Magic has been like that for me in the gaming space. Luis, you're particularly talented, I would say. You and Kenji Newmont are both, 2 of the best I've seen at just picking up a new format, really almost sight unseen and just diving in. Is there anything you could translate to us lay people that would help us?
In general, like, you can usually read a little bit about a format to try to figure it out. Like, oh, Rise of the Eldrazi was really slow, and like, cheap creatures aren't that good there, or like, this color's unplayable in this format is like a pretty good one to know about. But overall, I think kind of knowing the kinds of having a good idea of what good rates are. Like, we generally now know 3 mana for a 2/3 is just not very good. So it has to have a good ability for you to want to play it. And knowing in this format, like, there's some formats where 2 mana 2/2s, like, actually MKM is kind of like this. A 2 mana 2/1 generally gets put in your deck in MKM. Like, they all have like little minor abilities, but like, it's not like Sanitation Bot, the 2 mana 2 Sanitation Automaton, the 2 mana 2/1 Surveil one. It's not a very good card, but how often is it in someone's sideboard at the end of a draft? Like, I bet like basically everyone that gets open gets played somewhere. And that's just because that is a good deal in this format. So kind of knowing that is pretty helpful, and to just know the themes of the format. Is kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm also much more willing to just grab onto a theme. If I pick up a black-white card and then a couple of white cards and a black card, I'm just like, all right, like, just so that I can narrow it down to only having to read 2 or 3 cards out of a pack and not, all 10 or whatever that are left. That helps a lot too. It's obviously not optimal, but what are you going to do? Let's do one more question here. We actually have more, but we're running out of time. So we're going to stop with Steve here, who says, I just played pickup basketball for the first time in 5 years, recruiting some friends from F&M and local cube groups to join me, and I am very stoked. So can we pretend for a second that your podcast is round ball resources instead? Any quick tips for improving at basketball, or even big concepts to share? What's the quadrant theory for pickup ball? Oh, this is great stuff, because I'm sure regular listeners know that I'm playing tonight. And Luis, you've actually been playing a bit lately too, right?
Yeah, we've met weekly, kind of similar to Steve here, with first time in years, but we have now a squad of a bunch of current and former Magic players. Mm-hmm. If you ever wanted to get elbowed by a Hall of Famer, well, Raptor's there for you, and he has more than the normal human amount of elbows, just from what I can tell.
He was born with extra elbow.
But I mean, a lot more about basketball than I do. I think in general, like, learning where to be and where people are going to be is a really big skill. Cause like, we have a mix of players, and like, there's some players there who are like a lot more athletic and in shape than I am, who have not played very much basketball, where I played a lot. So I don't move as much as they do, but I can move to where I need to be. And like, they are a little more chicken with their head cut off in that regard. And then you have, people who are both those things, and then they're much better than me. So, right. But I mean, you played a ton of basketball, Marshall, and you can tell the difference between someone who knows where they're supposed to be on the court and what they're kind of supposed to be doing versus not. And you don't have to be good at shooting and dribbling and passing. You don't have to be good at everything. Just try to be good at like one of those things and passable at another, so you can provide a lot of value that way to your team.
I agree. I mean, the first step is to be able to exist on the court, and that is difficult, because you do need to kind of understand the flow of bodies as they move back and forth, and not, there's ways that you move on a basketball court that, you wouldn't on a different sport necessarily. And those happen naturally over time. Like, so you don't have to like learn them, but you should be aware of those. Spacing is important when you play pickup basketball, making sure that you're not standing right next to somebody who has the ball, because then you by default drag the person who's guarding you to them, and they have to deal with two defenders. So, just straight off the bat, if somebody has the ball, give them some space to work and make sure that that's on the list. And then, Luis, what you said is totally true, even of advanced pickup basketball players, which is like the group I play with now, which is that they tend to be specialists. It's really hard in basketball to be good at everything. And so what they'll usually do is get good at one thing or maybe two things, right? And that's kind of their go-to move or their go-to thing. There's always somebody who's like, I'm the 3-point shooter. I just sit out here and shoot threes, and that's just kind of what I do. There's somebody who can drive to the basket. There's somebody who can post up. There's somebody who's good at rebounds or defense or whatever. And then the other thing is to not put too much emphasis on whether you're making baskets or not for your team. You can add so much upside value to winning. And remember, basketball is a team sport. It's usually played 5-on-5. So, on any given game, you're not going to score that much. There's 4 other players on your team alone, and you only get the ball half the time, roughly, your team. So, there's not going to be that many opportunities. I think people that are learning to play put a huge amount of emphasis on if they make a basket or not. And yes, of course, that is the fun part and what it's called and all that. So definitely, relish that when it happens. But you should recognize that you can add a lot to your team without making a basket while you're still learning. Steve also says, can you take a sec to evangelize playing basketball to the listeners? Magic is a sedentary hobby, but lots of players also love basketball, and a lot of us like me could use the exercise. Thank you to both. Yeah. I will. Basketball's really my first love, my first passion, and it's the thing it's never gone away. I'm super excited to go play tonight, and I've been playing forever now. So, for me, basketball is worth evangelizing. My favorite things about basketball, the number one is you are comparing it to other sports, right? Because if you're going to play something active like this, it's a sport, you're going to have some choices to make. And basketball to me is the best one. And I mean that not just because it's my favorite, but I actually think it's the best sport. And the reason for that, there's a couple of things, but the main one is that in basketball, you have to be able to do everything. You play offense when your team has the ball. You try to make a basket. You try to make a move. You do these things. But then when the other team has the ball, you have to be the one to also play defense. This is actually surprisingly rare in most sports. In football, they're effectively different teams. There's basically nobody who plays offense and defense in football. The two teams could pass like ships in the night and never really talk to each other. They have their own coaches for those teams at the professional level. There's a defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. Like they just have nothing to do with each other. And if you're a football player, you're extremely specialized, right? Like you do one thing on one side of the ball. There's a guy whose job
it is to return, a punt return, special teams. Like
yes.
He catches it when they punt it. That's all he does.
That's it. The kicker comes out, kicks, that's it. And in basketball, you can't get away with that. It's so much better to be a more well-rounded athlete and strategy and all of the things that comes with playing both offense and defense. And even in games like soccer, where it might technically be true, the spacing on how big the field is means that there are players who are defenders. And while occasionally they will score, that's not really their role. And they tend to stay back a bit more. In basketball, there's no hiding. Everybody has to play all the stuff. So that's really cool. And then the other thing is that basketball has effectively no ceiling. And I love that. I'm attracted to anything like that. Magic's like that.
Indoors?
Yeah, we do. There's no ceiling of the skill level that you can develop in basketball. Basically, there's always something that you can do better, that you can do more, but it really rewards you for putting in the work. So if you want to start playing pickup ball and, look, you don't want to be the person who's like, spending every single waking hour on trying to get good at pickup basketball necessarily. That might not be worth it for your time because I'm sure everybody has other things in their life. But if you do take it seriously enough to just do some drills, to go out on your own and get some shots up, to do some practice stuff in between games, you can really see improvement. And it's linear. I mean, it starts off with like, oh my God, I'm getting so much better, but you keep going. You don't level off for a really long time. in my experience, and there's always something that you can work on and get better at it. So, and then of course there's the team strategic elements, which will definitely appeal to Magic players as well, because there is a lot going on with the strategy of the game. And it's similar to Magic in the sense of, resource management and where to place your best players and all that kind of stuff. So yes, I highly recommend trying out basketball. I am a fan of watching it at any level, and I will play it basically anytime I can get the chance to do so. So yes, that was me evangelizing basketball. Let's call it good there, Luis. It's getting a little late, and I know you got stuff to do, and I do too. So I'll save these questions, and we'll try to get them in Patreon question of the week coming up as well, because there's some really good ones left. We just did them in chronological order. So there you go. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thank you to each and every one of you who asked a question on Patreon. We really appreciate it. And if you'd like to be able to do so, it's patreon.com/limited resources. We also want to say thank you to Ultimate Guard for sponsoring the show. You can check out all their stuff at ultimateguard.com, and you can buy whatever you want at your local game store or your favorite online retailer. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Jeff, did Luis just hang up on us?
He did. He said he had to bail for his meeting.
He said he had an awesome sign-off.
He did.
You know what this means? We're still alive. You have to come up with a sign-off now.
Oh God! Okay, one second. Let me make it so that the.
I have one you could do if you can't come up with anything, but you could tell us about the president.
I do have one kind of that follows on. I could tell us about the Irish president,
because that was funny. We were talking about that before.
You know
the
what?
show.
That's good. We talked about that in the pre show.
Apparently, a dog lover.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really remember how we got onto this, but yeah, in the while we were preparing for recording the podcast, we were talking about the Irish president. It was because you brought up that our I'll say prime minister because no one will understand the word.
Yeah, I said prime minister
resigned
too,
out of nowhere, and we just got talking about Irish politics, and we were talking about how beloved our current president is. The president in Ireland is just like a diplomatic role. It's not like the president of the United States, where I think he's still commander in chief of the military forces here, but he's more of a diplomat and doesn't really influence like policy and lawmaking and that kind of stuff. Where the prime minister would be. It's kind of, I suppose, similar to like the offices of the monarch in England. As much as I hate to make that analogy, and the prime minister in England, where the prime minister is the actual head politician, and the president here then is just the lead diplomat. But our current president, Michael D. Higgins, is much beloved, a really really lovely man. Looks, for all intents and purposes, like you would imagine a leprechaun to look like, and he is very fond of Bernese Mountain Dogs. So he has 2 Bernese Mountain Dogs, and they are always with him at all times, and they're absolutely lovely. If you look up the Irish president like videos or anything like that, you'll see tons of like parties or addresses he's doing to the press, and the dog is always at his feet, and like looking to play with him and that kind of thing. And like our president is also a poet, so he does a lot of like poetry readings and that kind of thing at the president's house. With like foreign diplomats and things like that, and the dogs are just always like loose at the ballrooms. So
that's great. That's really cool. They have such a character, you know. At that level. All right, thanks, Jeff. Good save.
Yeah, you're welcome.